Hey there, welcome to episode 4 of DEI in 5 bite-sized discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today we're going to be tackling the harmful statement, I don't see color, as it relates to race. Now, unless you're talking about a visual impairment like being colorblind, saying I don't see color, quote unquote, is not only harmful, but it's also viewed as ableist language. And just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean people aren't using it. So let's dive into why this statement is so problematic. We often reference the famous quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, where he spoke about his dream of a nation, emphasis on dream, where his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And while many have interpreted this quote to mean that we should perhaps disregard race and treat everyone the same, Dr. King's children have said numerous times that their father wasn't implying that we should ignore race at all. And I'll link one of the articles below where they're quoted saying this. But the reality is that our society has long placed social hierarchy on race, and nearly all of us have unconsciously internalized racial hierarchy to some degree. So to say, I don't see color means you're choosing to ignore a person's unique identity, their experiences, and how oppression has perhaps impacted them and the generations before them as well. But it's more than that, right? By saying, I don't see color, you're actively choosing to ignore racism and avoid any sort of tough discussions or conversations as it relates to race. And quite frankly, that is not acceptable. We can't ignore the impact of race on our society just because it's uncomfortable to talk about or we're afraid of making mistakes. In fact, having the option to ignore or disregard racism is an exercise of power and privilege. And by definition, racism requires both power and privilege. So you could say that choosing to say, I don't see color, and to live that way accordingly is an act of racism. It takes a certain level of privilege to have the option to not think about or acknowledge how your race influences how you interact with the world and how the world interacts with you. If you belong to a historically marginalized group and try to live with a I don't see color mentality, you'll almost always find that the world will find a way to remind you that society as a whole perceives you as less than. And if you don't believe me, just look at the data. Financial institutions, housing, healthcare, education, you name it, there is systemic racism baked into all of those areas of life. When I hear, often when I hear I don't see color from individuals, I find that there is a significant lack of understanding of real world inequity and how equity and equality differ. It's not about treating everyone the same. It's really about taking into consideration the unique needs of each person. For example, because I love taking things from theory into practice and making it real for folks, let's say that you have two students applying to the same college. They're equally intelligent and hardworking. They've both received a scholarship for the same amount of money, but one is Black and comes from a family that has been significantly impacted by systemic inequity for generations, while the other is white and comes from, let's say, a middle class family. And let's say they both owe $500 after the scholarship is applied. The Black student is $500 short of being able to attend school and perhaps be a first generation student, while the white student can pay the remaining $500 without issue. So this is a real world example. This is the reality of our world. There is no one size fits all approach, right? And that does not work. One size fits all approaches do not work when systemic inequity is at play, which is pretty much always. So ignoring the role that racial hierarchy continues to play in our society only leads to less progress, and we may even find ourselves regressing. Some might argue that we've regressed a bit since the civil rights era, but it's really overdue. It's really overdue that we've had these tough conversations and confront these uncomfortable realities about our world. So that's it for today's DEI in 5. Let me know what you think about this whole idea or statement of I don't see color. Drop a comment below. And if you are into this content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Check out the other videos in the series, and I will see you back here tomorrow.